I'm Ramona Abbott, and this time we are up close and personal with Glenn Hergenhahn-Zhao, who is the Artistic Director of the Idiom Theater here in Bellingham. Welcome, Glenn.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Tell me this. When you are directing, what does that give you? What has directing brought your life?
I feel like directing is it's pretty wonderful art form because it's kind of invisible. You know, you're there. I always think of directing as that you're there to be an audience until there's an audience. And essentially, since you're making this play for the audience, you're kind of guiding it along. And it's a lot of a kind of editing and imagination, like visualizing how things are going to be. I feel like a big part of playwriting and a big part of that process is it's not so much guessing, you know, how the audience is going to react, but there's this wave of experience from lights up to lights down that, like, just like with acting, one thing affects the other. And as you're constructing a play, you have to kind of be aware of that. And the actors shouldn't be aware of it. They have enough to think about, and we don't want them to think. So the director's kind of seen that big picture. How is this experience going to be for the audience? And at Idiom, I think especially it's a very collaborative thing. There's not like a lot of hierarchy or class in our system. So I feel like the director is just another member of the team that's there. You know, it's always a little different. Like when you're directing for a 48, you know, you got your work cut out for you. You get in there, you block the play, you make sure your actors know their lines, and you know, it's kind of a new thing at Idiom that we have, you know, some shows that we have 8-week rehearsals for, which I feel, for me, you know, after doing those quick turnarounds for 10 years, that's really what I like. I like to have the longer time with a more ambitious play, which is a new thing at Idiom as well. And that's a totally different ballgame. But it's interesting because I think you're so engaged, you feel like the play is part of you, and then at the end you step out and it, you know, goes on without you, and it becomes this thing between the audience and the actors, and the director kind of disappears. But
Excellent.
It's nice.
What have you had to give up?
What have I had to give up for theater?
For directing or for theater?
Well, you know, it's a choice, you know, to do this type of thing. I came back. I've only been back as artistic director for less than a year at Idiom. I ran that theater for 8 years or so. So it's a lot of work. You know, I work 60 hours a week in that place, and you don't have an opportunity to do much else. And so I think there's some sacrifice involved, but you know, there is with creating anything good. I think you get out exactly what you put into it.
I'd like you to talk for a few minutes about the 7 sicknesses.
Yeah.
So for those of you who don't know, this was the West Coast premiere of something that I think has only been attempted once before on the East Coast, right?
Twice. Once in Chicago and then once in New York.
And Bellingham. How cool is that? So tell us about that, Glenn.
So we just finished doing a play called These 7 Sicknesses by Sean Graney. And the play is a distillation of all 7 surviving Sophocles tragedies. It's 4.5 hours long. It was for Idiom. It was our biggest show that we've ever done. It was our biggest cast. You know, it has music and fighting and a lot of blood effects, and it's long, so we take 2 intermissions. We serve dinner and dessert during the intermissions, and I had the opportunity to see the production at the Flea in New York City. And I had a friend who was in that production, and there's been so New York has done quite a few of what I would call marathon theater events, these plays that are 5 hours, 10 hours long. I was really taken by it. I've always been taken by the Greek dramas, and we've never really done any. We've done a lot of variations on the Greek stories or adaptations, but Ever since I saw it, I kind of had it kicking around the back of my head, and I thought it was maybe a little too big for our theater. And when I proposed doing it at our theater, there was a lot of doubts about doing a 4.5-hour play that was all Greek tragedies. And I had doubts as well, whether anybody would come. But we plunged into it, and we made it a big part of our fall season, and we'd been working on it for about half a year, at least as far as, we started casting it last spring. We had a long rehearsal process for it, and we put it up, and I could go on about the process. There was a lot of things that went right and a lot of things that went wrong, but it ended up, we opened it up not knowing what the reaction was going to be to it, and you could tell right away it just kind of clicked with people. It was one of those evenings that I think becomes more than a play. It was kind of an event, and the word of mouth just kind of, you could feel it travel through the town, and within a weekend or so we were filling up and selling out our last performances. So,
which is terrific. It was an amazing production. I did go see it, and it was absolutely amazing. One of the things I want to ask you about is, it seems like anyone who has been involved in theater has at least one horror story of something magnificently going wrong in a fabulously awful way. Could you share one with us?
I don't know where to start.
So hard to choose.
My
Something
goodness.
went fabulously wrong.
Well, I always tell this story, and this is kind of my personal theater nightmare. Everyone has these theater dreams that everything is going wrong. So this was in the space that is now Idiom, but is years before we started, and I was directing a play called Museum by Tina Howe, which was another fairly big production. I think we had a cast of 16, and everyone was playing multiple parts. It takes place in a museum at a group exhibit, a group sculpture exhibit, and there's just kind of a constant parade of characters through the museum. And this actor, Jeremy Eckley, who still does work for us, despite the story I'm about to tell, he was cast in, I think, 4 different roles. The first role he played was a Frenchman, and he and this other woman, actress, came in, and they were arguing. They had an argument in French, basically, about the art. And we had our matinee performance, and a half hour before the show, all the actors were there except Jeremy. 20 minutes, 10 minutes, most of our audience was there, still no Jeremy. And so in that play, we all had programs, or the actors had programs. I was directing, I was not in the show. And so I, just as the only solution I could come up with, we photocopied the script and pasted it into the programs. And when showtime came, I had to go out on stage and perform this role that I've never performed in French, which I don't speak. And it was awful. It was awful. It happened. Something came out of my mouth resembling French without trying to stare at my program. And I walked off stage, and Jeremy was there with, big round eyes. And I was both hugely angry at him and also very relieved to see him, because he still had 3 more parts in this play that I then did not have to play. And there's a flip side to this story that Jeremy tells, which is actually much more interesting, which is until Seven Sicknesses, this was 12 years ago, that was the last matinee that we had done, largely because of that trauma that happened. That was a matinee. So Jeremy was in the park playing Frisbee, and his parents drove by and pulled over, and they said, "Hello, Jeremy, what are you doing?" He's like, "I'm just playing Frisbee. What are you guys doing?" And they're like, "We're going to see a play." And he's like, "What play are you seeing?" They're like, "Museum by Tina Howe." And he's like, "Ah." And so his parents were the ones that found him and brought him to the theater.
Oh, that's wonderful.
So I still occasionally have dreams about that one.
That is actually very funny, because that is very close to the dream I have. Yeah, because I'm always going to come on first, don't know my lines, and have to find some prop to hide those. So that is an absolute classic. If you look at your body of work, of your entire performing career, writing, directing, etc., what is the one you're the most proud of?
Well, I mean, aside from Idiom as a whole, I feel like Idiom Theater has been my project for a decade. So the work that the theater does, I'm pretty proud of. That is an interesting question. Like I said, I mostly consider myself a playwright. So there's a lot of short plays that I've written that I'm pretty proud of. I feel like the 10-minute play thing really clicks with me, and so I've put out 3 collections of those short plays. The first one was called The Man Who Fell Off His Bicycle, that we performed, and the last one was The Wonders of the Swirling Night, and I really like those pieces. The full-length plays that I'm most happy with are probably Shiner. I really was happy with Bryceus and the Highline Sermons. I feel like my most recent work is always my favorite, because if I think too far back, I start I've learned things hopefully since then, and so they start.
So if you could be immensely talented and gifted at something that you currently are not, what would it be?
I think writing music and performing more music, that's something, again, that was part of my experience of being in New York, was how much I worked with some really talented people, and especially some really talented singers and composers. I worked with Cormac Bluestone on a couple shows, and the way that they incorporated music into the creative process for theater was really important. And he and Anya Sapphire, who was one of my instructors at the Atlantic Theater and my director in a couple shows, they both kind of made the commitment that live music is part of all of their shows, or at the very least no pre-recorded music, which I think both those things go hand in hand. And so since I've been back, that's kind of seeped into my work. We wrote all the original music for these 7 Sicknesses, and we've had more and more live music, and trying to get away from using any sort of pre-recorded things, at least in my stuff. And I don't consider myself a musician, but I really like to incorporate music into the shows. And even we haven't talked about Northwest Passage at all, but I have this other side project, like I'm not busy enough.
Yes, because
we devised a play called Monsters last year, and we brought a band, Falling Upstairs, into the process, and the whole show, that play had no dialogue, and the whole show had a soundtrack that was performed by this live band. And to me, like that just brings a whole different dimension into the plays, that I would like to be better at music theory and composing.
I know that at least one of the 48s that I did with the Idiom had music, and maybe 2 of them. Because I do remember in one of them, I said, I am happy to play a character who can't sing but thinks that she can.
Yeah, the one you did last January.
Oh my gosh, and it was tremendously freeing, I have to say, in a way, to be able to do that, because another childhood terror was the idea of singing in front of people, and to discover that you could have the fun of playing a character who thought she was a great singer but wasn't, and not drop dead of a stroke on the spot, was immensely freeing. So that's great for theater.
Yeah. Almost everything we do at Idiom is local. So that process from idea to page to directing to bringing it into the rehearsal process and giving it in front of the audience is all this little world that happens in that room down on Cornwall Avenue. And I think for anybody who comes, especially the people who come often, they can attest that it's a pretty amazing thing. It's very different than
that
going
it
to see a
is,
movie.
and I can attest to that. I can attest to that both myself, and as someone who has a good friend who has not yet been to one of the productions, but is always on standby for costuming calls when I'm doing the 48.
Nice.
So there you have it. Thank you, Glenn, for being a part of this conversation today. And I'm Ramona Abbott, and we have been up close and personal with Glenn Hergenhanzau of the Idiom Theater, which go down, become part of the audience and part of the act.